Chapter 4, What He Has Found and What She Has Lost. Kino. The wound on my left leg had scabbed, and it seemed like it was drying up pretty fast, but I wrapped a bandage around it so the wound would not crack open again when I walked. I still limp, but Mayo gave me a stick he said I could use as a cane. I remembered the same gesture from Arden. "How are you?" Mayo asked sheepishly. I groaned. I knew what he wanted to hear, my conversation with my mother from the past days. I did not want to tell him everything, but he'd been pestering me for days, so I decided to tell him bits about it. "Sucks like hell. But it's better than before," I said, and wondered if it was really how I felt. At least, Mother's alive. She may not remember me now, but she will. I guess at the back of my mind, it will only take some time before the memories come flooding in. Mayo gaped at me and nodded. "Probably. If only I can convince Goemi to tell the truth." "Why would she lie about it?" I asked. Mayo shrugged. "Crazy twins," he muttered. "Miro is crazy beyond belief, and probably some of it rubbed off on Goemi. Who's to know what's running inside their heads?" "You've been with them longer. Have you found out why?" "Something else bothers me." "Why did Miro freeze Arden's heart?" "Everything was a blur from when I caught a fever up until the other day before my fever broke. I didn't get the chance to talk to him." Mayo chuckled. "You won't get anything talking to him. He grunts. Sometimes, he says complete sentences. But he's difficult to figure out." I stopped talking and looked at my mother. She was walking outside the hut, carrying our packs, while Goemi was trailing after her. Pyper was nowhere in sight. Mayo watched them too. "Speaking of," he said. "What will make her remember?" I said softly. Not softly enough to prevent Mayo from hearing, though. "Tell her what her power is," Mayo said. "Why?" "Because that's what she asked me when I told her that she's Mistress Lamare Amerk and not this Nia." "Whatever. She asked me what her power was." "So, she doesn't know what it is?" "Apparently not." "Then, what did the twins tell her?" "Something stupidly brilliant," Mayo said. "Which was?" "That she can make any man fall in love with her," Mayo said. Imagine the kind of stupid lie they came up with." Pyper appeared out of nowhere. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Mayo frowned. "Kino's wondering how to convince Mistress Lamare that she is Mistress Lamare, so I told him to tell her what power she possesses." Pyper looked at me. "That's pretty simple." "Why don't you?" "Because I don't know it either. She writes." "But that's everything I know about her power," I said. "See?" Mayo shouted. "I told you that's the only thing Kino told me about." Pyper flopped beside us. "Well, I never said I didn't believe you, but I found it odd. I mean, all the citizens' powers are listed in the registry. How come you didn't know? And now, that's the reason to get the registry from the palace." I leaned over. "You're right. We have to get it. We should have done so a long time ago." "Unless you're stupid royalty," Mayo said casually as he lay down on the ground. "What?" I asked incredulously. "Royalty. Didn't you hear me? Royalty doesn't get to divulge its powers, and they can keep it to themselves forever. It's a privilege. It was taught to us early in class. Don't you remember, or has your on and off fever made you forget everything?" Mayo said in exasperation. "I know. I remember, but by far, I think that's the silliest thing you ever said." Pyper looked concerned, and her eyes squinted at Lamare. "Maybe Mayo has a point," she began. "Come to think of it, look at how your mother moves. It's like there's a stick stuck behind her back. Her posture is to be envied. She moves so gracefully that when I'm with her, I get doubts if I'll ever grow up to be that ladylike." I laughed. "That's not possible." "Maybe it is. Who is your father anyway?" Pyper said. It was my turn to frown. In my head, I always imagined I would ask her if I ever got to talk to my mother again. But how can I do that now? So, let's not head to Nivedon. Let's go instead to Canella and steal the book, the Registry of Citizens, the way we planned, Pyper said. That way, we'll know your mother's power. We can tell her about it, and she will believe you're her son. Besides, once we have the book, we can search for someone with a similar power as yours. Maybe you inherited it from someone. I don't know, I said. Mother and Goemi kept on moving about. At this time, there were already several packs on the ground. Maybe it was time to leave. What do you mean you don't know? Come on. That has always been the plan before we crossed our paths with Arden and Quila, Pyper said. I don't want to lose my mother again, I said. If going to Nivedon means she'll be safe, I prefer that. I don't care if she doesn't remember me for as long as she lives. Someday, she will find it in her heart to love me again. She did before. There's no way she won't again. Mayo nodded. He could be very supportive sometimes. Aren't you interested in finding out? Pyper asked. I am. But there are things more important than finding out who my father was. Or what my mother's power was. Besides, you could be royalty, Mayo piped in again. Which means getting the registry is only a futile effort. Stop talking about royalty to me. I argued. No, Pyper said. I have to agree with Mayo on this one. If you were royalty, it would give us the answers we're seeking. Such as? Why did the Emperor want you dead? She said. Mayo nodded at high speed. That's right. If you're royalty, he may think of you as a threat. So, he wanted you dead. I went ballistic. That's impossible. Is it? How much do you know about your heritage? Mayo asked. Enough to let me live peacefully, I said. See? You have no idea who you are. There's no chance you'll find out with Mistress Lamare having lost her memory, Mayo said. I'm changing sides now. I agree with Pyper. We should push for Canella. No. I can't lose my mother again. I can't endanger her life, I said stubbornly. Making her remember is not important anymore. She's here with me. That's all I asked for from the gods. Mayo and Pyper fell silent, but a kind of look passed across them, and I knew they would not let the discussion die this easily. Quila arrived. She talked to Mother and Goemi. A sword almost as long as Goemi's legs was strapped to her waist. It was still odd to see Quila with Arden's sword. They walked over to us, and we stood up. It's time to go, Mother said. I smiled at her and wished I could ride with her. But for now, I would not. She was here. She was very much alive and safe. I should be thankful for this, yet in the back of my head, I was still irked Goemi claimed Mother as her own. Then, we walked towards the horses and mounted. This time, we're really going to Nivedon. No matter how dangerous the journey, I would no longer let myself be separated from my mother.
Goemi pass up. Growing up, Grandma told me that the most important thing in this world was one's family. I remember staring at her long and hard as she said those words, wanting to demand from her that if it were the case, then how come Mother died early? If a family is the most valuable thing in the world, how come Father left us with Grandma? But I had never been argumentative. I like to think about things and stuff and understand the reasons behind people's actions. To me, Father left not because he wanted to, but because he had to. In that sense, I was leaving him a room in my heart, so when the time came that he decided to go back to us, I would welcome him without any hesitation. But my mother was gone. Grandma was gone. Father was gone. And now, so was Miro. How did I end up so alone in this world? I asked to stop for a while because I could not see and think straight. My thoughts are troubled. My chest was exploding, and I wanted to take a rest from it all. Sitting on the ground, I hugged my knees tightly to my chest, hoping that the warmth of my body would cover up for the ever-foreboding coldness inside my heart. Someone stirred from my back, but I did not bother to look up. I think this should belong to you now, Quila said. I did not move. I was not in the mood to talk. The velvet pouch grazed my arm, then Quila pressed it against my hand. I took the pouch and stared at her, surprised. This is yours to keep, I said. She shook her head. I think Arden would have wanted you to have it. What we had was a dream, and then you came. Since then, his desire for the circus to become a success intensified. She paused and smiled sadly, so that you can be proud of him. Did you know that? I guess in my heart, I always knew, but before I could respond, the words died in my throat. I have his sword. You can have the coins, Quila said. I clutched the pouch against my breast even though what I wanted was Arden's hat. Sadly, it was lost in the woods. Quila and I sat together in silence. The last time we talked like this was before we were joined by Arden, Pyper, and Kino. In fact, I was never really reunited with Arden. The horseback ride was brief, and we exchanged just a few words between us that I could hardly call conversations. I never told him I love him back, I said, feeling guilty. Quila looked concerned, a wave of nostalgia passing her eyes. I guess he had always known, she said kindly. No. You don't understand. It's just 3 words. Arden told me twice, and I didn't say anything, like it didn't mean anything to me when in fact, it did. It did, I said in desperation. I miss him so much, Quila said. Her voice quivered, and I felt sorry for her. Maybe I should stop thinking about myself and Arden. This girl beside me lost everything when she lost Arden. I shouldn't be selfish, but nothing could be done about it now. I reached out to touch her hand. I miss him too. So much. Then, Quila cried. I pulled her close to me and let my tears fall down too. Crying wasn't so abominable once you got used to it. We're going to stick together, I whispered. Arden would have wanted that. Quila embraced me tighter, nodding. Arden would have wanted that, she repeated. When Quila left to get some water, Nia came walking toward me. She sat beside me, her eyes searching my face. We really should get going now, Nia began. We've stayed here long, and I don't think it's safe. Your brother can't protect us anymore, and I fear that the general and his men will return for us. Besides, there are hubbubs. I nodded without really thinking. I felt like I had to respond to what Nia said. Without saying another word, Nia rested a hand over mine and squeezed it. After an hour, we will start moving again. In the meantime, I will leave you with your thoughts. Mourn him some more, but come back to us, to me, she said. She rose to walk away. Mama, I said. Nia turned to look at me. My eyes searched her face. It was odd that she still believed me after the general claimed that she was Lamare Amerk. Was it kindness because she understood that right after losing Arden and Miro, I could not bear losing her too? Do you think Arden knows I love him? Nia's eyes softened, and she walked back to where I was. She crouched down in front of me, her forehead touching mine. I was gazing at her caramel brown eyes, the most beautiful shade that was the exact opposite of mine. I shivered for the lies Miro and I fabricated. Nia kept on nodding, tears brimming from her eyes. The tears did not fall as though holding them back was a definition of courage any mother wanted her daughter to learn. I bit my lower lip, suppressing my tears. I wrapped my arms around Nia's neck, thankful to her for acting like a real mother to me. When the skies got clearer, I would probably tell her the truth. But not yet. I opened my eyes. From a distance, I caught a glimpse of Kino. He was staring at us with sad eyes. Whether he was sympathizing with me or was envious, I could not tell. Then, suddenly, he shouted, "You're a liar. I hate that you're a liar. Maybe you should have died instead of Arden." My mouth hung open in shock. "It's not true," I murmured. Nia was staring at me, but she did not say anything. She looked at where Kino went running. Kino had stopped under a tree before pulling out something from his belt. He rubbed at the corners of his eyes, slumped on the ground, and started writing. "Actually, I'm not certain who and what to believe anymore," Nia said. I realized that fact hurt me more than when I saw Miro leaving me behind on a horse.
Kino Amerk. I thought it would be easy for me to be with my mother as the days passed, even though she did not recognize me. But seeing her every day with an imposter hurt. Goemi was the biggest liar in the whole of Akean, and I did not understand how she could stand lying to all of us. If she ever really did care for Mother, why would she lie like that? Yesterday was better. I could control my emotions, but today, I felt kind of lonely. I wanted to talk to my mother, only to find her already with Goemi in an intimate discussion. Suddenly, I just lost it. I was ashamed of how I reacted, calling Goemi a liar and wishing for her death. That was way too cruel, but I would apologize for that when she finally found the courage to apologize to all of us, especially to Mother, for lying. I brushed at the tears that were still streaming down my cheeks. I missed the way my mother used to care for me, wishing she would remember me, so I would have something to hold on to. I never wanted to be envious of Goemi because I told myself that having a mother with us was already a gift from the gods. But when she hugged Goemi, I felt this unmistakable pang of jealousy. I had to move away from Pyper and Mayo because I wanted to be alone. But it was useless because my gaze kept on falling back to Goemi and my mother, wishing that if I could not have my mother back to myself, at least I could be part of that embrace. Goemi opened her eyes and stared at me. I tried to school my face to not show emotion, but I did not know if I had succeeded. I broke from her stare. The tears started to sprout, and this time, I rubbed at the corners of my eyes to prevent them from falling. I needed to be strong. I needed to get used to this because the gods only knew how long I would have to bear this. I remembered Reigen, the soldier who told me to write. He was right. I could not divulge everything to Pyper. She would feel sad, too, and I don't like seeing her sad. And Mayo, I don't know how much he could take if I kept telling him how much I missed Mother. If I did tell them, I think they would pester me into going to Canella. So, I rested my back against a tree and did what Reigen told me to do. I stared at the parchment spread out across my lap. I flipped it, so a clean sheet lay before me and started pouring out my thoughts. I miss her, I wrote. Then, I stared at the words and felt so sad because the one person in the world who was enough to make me feel loved again did not miss me back. I wished I could go back to when we stayed in Wawang village, and my mother would come inside my room and tuck me into bed. Food was nasty, the school was full of bullies, and I had no power, but I was happy. Maybe it was not exactly pleasant, but at least everything had been enough. More than enough, if I threw in the fact that I knew there was my mother to always come home to. I gazed at the words I wrote and underlined them. Then, in the next line, I wrote again. I love her. Dear gods, why can't they give my mother's memories back? Why can't they throw that in if they had been kind enough to let her live again? Was it blasphemy to ask them for so much? To have my mother back? I rubbed at the corners of my eyes again, afraid I would not be able to catch the tears before they welled up again. I breathed in and felt my throat constricting. I wish I did not have to be so envious of my mother's affection. I wish I did not have to fight for her. I wish I did not have to hold back on telling her how much I missed her. Then, the tears started falling because I lost all will to control them anymore. I missed my mother so badly. It was torture to have to see her and for her to feel differently towards me. Reigen was right. When I could not speak the words, I could always write them down. And maybe it would make me feel so much better. I started scribbling fast, pouring out what was inside my heart. I wished my mother would remember that she's Lamare Amurk. I hope she will love me again. Then, with a fierce desire to have her back, I wrote as though it was a summon. Mother, come back to me. My mouth opened wide. I held my breath in surprise as little flames consumed whatever I had written on the parchment.
Mia Passup. Even though I was torn about what version of the truth to believe in, I still allowed Goemi to sob against my shoulders. She was shaken by Kino's accusation, him calling her a liar. As for me, well, I was also quite taken by surprise. I felt sorry for Goemi and wished there was something I could do to take away her pain. But the pain was inevitable, and she had to learn that. It would make her stronger. Then, all at once, an emotion so strong engulfed me. I had to shut my eyes tightly as images, like waking dreams, entered my consciousness. I let go of Goemi and stood, eyes closed because it seemed like the images were more vivid then. The first face I saw was that of a man. His eyes were the same shade as mine, and he looked kindly at me, or a younger version of me. We were in a palace, and we were talking inside my room. The next time I saw him, his hair had already gone white, and I was older. It was a marriage ceremony, and a man whose face resembled the calm before the storm stood to claim my hand. I looked at the faces inside my head, and slowly, their names started to come to me. The old general was Paterno Rinaldo. Tirana Eriger was also there. And other generals whose names I knew by heart. Ion Noto. Rizalo Agia. Aristal Kokona. These were men I grew up looking up to. And the man who was claiming my hand in marriage was McQuinstorm Aaron. The old man whose eyes were the same as mine was my father, Nordsom Mendel Amerk. I shook as I stood in the woods. I let myself take the journey to my past. Memories kept coming back. This time, I remembered everything. Wind was declared the emperor. I stood against him, protesting and fighting for my heritage, but none of the generals dared to challenge Wind aside from one who ended up with his head separated from his torso. Then, I looked down and saw that my belly was oversized, and blood dripped from my legs to the floor. A woman, Saul, came and helped me. She rushed me to the healer to give birth. I shuddered at the realization that at that particular moment, I was about to give birth to a boy, someone who I would name Kino. I opened my eyes quickly and looked around, searching for the boy in the forest. I was immediately transported back to the present. I closed my eyes again, longing to have the other memories come back to me. I was running away from the palace after Wind spared Kino's life. For moon turns, I lived in Wawang village. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody remembered even a fragment of what I was to the Akeans before. The emperor controlled my power. As the royal scribe, he made me write hateful stories to make people corrupt. I wreaked havoc on the days ahead through my writing. This control over my power had gone on for moon turns before I realized I had to run away with my son and stop Wind from making me write the events that would unravel for Akean. Events that made the citizens need him. Situations that were nothing but the machinations of the emperor's cruel mind. Something prevented me from leaving, though. I choked as I remembered what it was. I had bound Kino's gift. My son was left without any power because the emperor had ordered me to bind Kino's power again and again and again. In every scroll I wrote, I had to cruelly forget about my boy's relevance to Akean, ignoring the inner voices of motherhood telling me that I should fight for my son and stop binding his power. This time, memories came to me faster. In the Akean Wine Festival, I was finally able to outsmart the emperor, but not before Kino had revealed himself to the emperor. I lost my energy and sank to the ground. I could hear Goemi's worried voice, asking me if I was all right. Oh, gods, forgive me, but right now, upon learning her lies, all I wanted to do was to strangle her. So, to prevent myself from unleashing wrath on Goemi, I ignored her. Goosebumps began to cover my skin upon the further realization that the people I had met, aside from Goemi and Miro, were telling me the truth. How could I have been so stupid? How could I not have seen through their lies? Was I that desperate to belong to accept whoever it was that first lay claim to me as a family? Kino was in the palace, and I was racing after him, trying to stop him from presenting to the emperor. But he already had, and the emperor had ordered his death. I kept shaking, clutching at my arms. Goemi's voice remained indistinct to my hearing. "Mama, are you all right? Tell me what's wrong." Her voice had taken on an edge as though she was afraid. Kino and I were running away. I was able to tell him I loved him. I opened my eyes as the memory of my heart, twisting in agony, came back to me. And then, I was gone. My tears were streaming down my face. I felt betrayed. Fooled and played around with by people who claimed to love me, my twins. "Mama?" Goemi said, her eyes concerned. Suddenly, I lost it. I could not bear to hear another word of her lies. I raised my right hand and swung, slapping her in the face. The anger that burst from my heart emanated through every part of my body. My tears continued to fall. "How could you lie to me?" I asked. "How could you manipulate me so? You and your twin, you're both evils. Imagine the lies that you came up with. Did you think I would never get my memory back? Did you wish that?" I shouted in anger. Goemi burst into tears. Mama. Believe me? It wasn't like that. Time and again, I told myself I would tell you the truth, but you have come to be so endearing, and it was painful to let you go. Oh my gods, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. You even had the gall to tell me that. We were trying to protect you. You were being pursued. When you're with us, you have a different name, a different life. No one could say otherwise because Miro and I were here to testify about your past life. She did not get to finish what she was saying because I could not tolerate any more of her lies. I struck her again on the cheek. Goemi clutched at her face before breaking into sobs. She slumped to the ground, murmuring, I'm sorry. I did not mean to. I was still seething with anger, but this was not so important now. I had to go to my son, to my only son. I lifted my skirt so I could run to where he was sitting. I stopped yards away from him, so I could watch him from a distance and allow my eyes to caress him when my hands failed to do so these past weeks. Kino was all hunched over, looking at the burning parchment. His unruly hair spiked out from all directions. His left leg was still bandaged and stretched right in front of him. I started walking towards him, my heart tender and raging with emotions at the same time. How could I have forgotten him, the only reminder from my past before I was stripped of my heritage? Before Lamare Amerk, who had been Princess of Akean, eldest of Northsum, came to be the royal scribe. I felt despondent. My son was hurting so much, and I couldn't do anything about it. When I was closer, he looked up and stared into my eyes. He rubbed at the corners of his eyes before his lips curved into a weak smile. He nodded slightly at me as though in greeting. That was the moment my heart broke. I lunged toward him and stopped a few steps away. Writing is my power. We used to live in Wawang village. I tucked you in bed every night, and when I had nightmares, you woke up and made me tea in the middle of the night. I paused. I'm Lamare Ariston Amerk, and I am your mother. Kino's eyes grew huge, and he jumped to his feet, dropping the parchment to the ground. He hugged me so tightly that I could barely breathe, but it was a most welcome hug. I embraced him tightly too, kissing the top of his head, pressing my cheek against his head, realizing how much I missed him. You're back, Mom, Kino said. Thank God you're back. His voice broke. I pulled back and bent down to look at his green eyes twinkling with happiness. This little man was my son. It was too much for me. I pulled him closer, and this time, when the tears started to roll down my cheeks again, I let them.
Ion Noto. Sinista smelled foul to me, as though the death of my soldiers was haunting us. I was contemplating leaving this godforsaken place, but Rhodora had insisted that the ones we were pursuing were still here. Given that information, I decided to stay and have another attempt at capturing Lamare or killing Dogan. Whatever worked. In the past, my intuition and my strength had always given me my victories. It's confirmed, Ion. They're a mile ahead, Rhodora said. We will strike from a wide angle, I told the remaining soldiers. They all looked determined to win this time. To avenge the deaths of their comrades. To give glory to the Emperor. That's what brought us together, the unquenchable thirst to rise in the eyes of the Emperor. The soldiers around me nodded, their faces determined. Then, they started moving away. We ride. I shouted. We galloped at high speed to reach Lamare. The wind blew against my face as we pushed to reach where Lamare's group had been found. Rhodora rode beside me. In a few minutes, I would claim victory over Sinista. There was movement somewhere far ahead. I could not mistake that long hair, the gentle, graceful curve of her body. It was Lamare. She was holding a boy. I ground my teeth in anger as I realized that Lamare lied to me about not knowing where the boy's whereabouts were. However, she would lose this war. Look at her, holding the boy as though she had the luxury of time to hug her boy. I say, if you were being pursued, stopping to take a break would only narrow the distance between oneself and the pursuers. I could not believe she could have acted so wantonly. Remember the Emperor's words, I hissed at Rhodora. Kill the boy. We can take him down, bind him, and give him alive to the Emperor, she argued. No. I snapped. He has strength. I don't want to give him the chance to escape. We'll catch them off guard, kill the boy, and take Lamare captive. Then, throw in Kilo's son. Sweet vengeance. Run. Someone shouted. I looked at where the voice came from and, much to my surprise, recognized General Kilo's son. He would not ruin it for me. I galloped towards him, and he stood there frozen. When I was closer, he started to run, but the effort was futile because the gap between us was narrow, and he had legs as thick as the logs. It probably was such an effort to lift them. I swooped down and grabbed the boy. He was heavy. I pulled him up, thankful for my strength, and threw him forcefully down in front of me. He kept twisting in the saddle, and I smacked the back of his head with my fist. He fell limply against me. The other children and Lamare were alarmed by our presence and were running away. Rhodora and my men were trailing after them. I could not wait for this day to be over. With already one captive, I could not fathom how fate could still go against me now.
Quila Tash. Run faster. I shouted at Goemi. But Goemi kept looking back at me. I won't leave you behind. Come on. She urged. It all happened so fast. One moment, we were all alone in the woods, and now, the general and his men were chasing us. All this happened at an inopportune time because Miro wasn't around to freeze their hearts. It has always been a struggle for me to run fast because I had a lot of unwanted fat. But I could be quick when I had to. I pumped my fists in the air and trailed after Goemi, avoiding roots that protruded on the ground. I wondered how far our feet would take us before the soldiers captured us. They got Mayo, Goemi said. My heart beat faster, and I wanted to stop and help him. Let's go get him, I said. No. Goemi shouted. We can't. My power's practically useless, and so is yours. I did not know what to do. I sifted my thoughts, trying to come up with something to help Mayo, but none came. Goemi was right. My power was as useless as hers when it came to fighting. I wanted to weep, but there was no time for that either, so I ran harder, hoping my feet would not fail me. Pyper San Diego. I coated myself in invisibility and started running away. I had to find Kino. Mayo had been taken, and there was nothing I could do about it now. When I get to Kino, we could devise a rescue plan to take Mayo back. I ran faster, my eyes searching for Kino. But he was also running away into the woods with Mistress Lamare behind him. Then, arrows started shooting from behind me, and I ducked. When I turned around, soldiers were galloping after me. Or, since they could not see me, I figured the arrows were meant for Kino and Mistress Lamare. The soldiers were scattered in the woods, and I did not know if one would suddenly appear behind me and grab me. I rolled to the side, arrows still flying all around me. Then, I hid behind a tree as I watched the soldiers galloping away, set on capturing Kino and Mistress Lamare. My heart thudded inside my chest, and for the first time, I did not know what to do and longed for Arden. In the months we were together, he somehow took the lead in our group, and I relied on his instincts. But now was not the time for that. I started running again after the soldiers, hoping I could prevent them from hurting Kino and his mother. Someone grabbed me from behind. I twisted and flailed, but his arms were strong, and I could not escape his grip. He dragged me away from the fighting. I kicked and kicked, shrieking, but the man would not let go. Stop it! Help! I shouted, although I knew that no one would come to my rescue. Keep quiet, or I'll have to knock you to sleep, a cold voice said. I looked at the hands holding me and found nothing but the gooey edges of his hands, telling me that the person who held me was an invisible Niven. Please. I begged. Let me go. I need to find my friends. No. We will rescue them. You will stay here. You can't make me. I shouted. The ropes will make sure I will find you when I get back here, he said. Then, he pushed me against a tree and started tying me up. The hubbubs would kill me, I said. The man stopped what he was doing, and I thought I had tricked him. But all he did was carry me again and climb the tree. He glided effortlessly as climbing was second nature to Nivens. I twisted, even knowing he would not let me loose. Please. Stop it. I have to get down and help my friends, I yelled. You're only going to make it more difficult. I can't have you killed by someone. Your father's going to have my neck if anything happens to you, he said. Manny-ren? I asked. It is me, he said. He tied the ropes and climbed down, leaving me up in a tree to shrivel and die. I wanted to scream for being so helpless, but I did not think anyone would bother me now. Everyone was trying to run for their lives. Kino and Lamare, Goami and Quila. Where were they anyway? If we hadn't been mourning Arden all along, we would have gotten away. Tears started to course down my cheeks. I could not believe it. After all this time, due to the helplessness of the situation, I found myself crying.
Kino Amerk. I ran away from the soldiers, and I winced as my leg throbbed. I ignored the pounding pressure of my leg wound and kept running. Mother was right behind me, and I knew I had to run faster so she would do the same. The general would not lay his hands upon us. An arrow dashed through the air, and I felt a sting on my ear as it grazed me. Regardless, I kept on running. I could feel the scab on my wound peeling off. Probably, the wound would find itself raw again. Mother overtook me. She grabbed my hand and dragged me with her, and I had to push myself to be faster. Faster! They're right behind us, she said. All I could do at that moment was run and not think about anything else. Countless times, I found myself amidst the chaos I never thought would happen in my lifetime. I did not understand it, nor did I have any desire to understand it. But I knew we had to run and escape. Anything else aside from this primal instinct of survival was irrelevant now. The day was dark, although it wasn't noon yet. The clouds were gathering above. When I thought nothing else could add up to the difficulty we were having at running, it rained. The drops were quick and heavy, as though the sky was shooting down its vengeance upon us. I ran faster and avoided the arrows that pursued us. I had my heart in my throat the whole time and had to remind myself to breathe. Come on, think Kino, think. I urged myself. Then, I remembered that I could turn myself invisible, so I did. The power of invisibility could be extended to another person, so I did the same to Mother. And true enough, we immediately blended in the forest. Find them! Came a loud voice after us. The soldiers went wild. The arrows stopped shooting at us for a while, but then, someone shouted, "Don't stop shooting. The arrows will give away their location. Shoot randomly. Shoot everywhere." I ran and gripped my mother's hand tighter. Rain fell in torrents, and it gave away our footsteps. No matter how fast we ran, the soldiers would be able to find us. We should make good time running if we were to take advantage of the ground that had not started to soften yet. While our footsteps could not be masked, we could increase the distance between us and our pursuers. This time I was the one pulling at Mother's hand, guiding her somewhere to the left side, hoping the soldiers would march forward while we avoided their path. Arrows started shooting again. One landed right against the tree we passed. If not for the tree, it would have gone straight through my body. I shivered at the thought. And then, more arrows shot through the air. I wondered if the soldiers would ever run out of arrows. I almost slipped as Mother's grip tightened even more upon my hand. She faltered, and I had to slow down. "What's wrong, Mom?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "Keep running." Through the rain, we ran faster and faster. My heart was beating like crazy. Lightning split the sky overhead, and then thunder followed. It gave me an excuse to be louder. "Run faster, Mom," I urged, but her pace did not change. I pulled at her hand and veered her to the right, hiding against two trees that had their trunks intertwined. I looked up and wondered if my mother could climb. "Let's go up," I said. Mother did not object. Instead, she pushed me further up as I hoisted myself on a branch. When my foothold was secured, I bent down to grab her other hand. "I won't let you fall, Mom," I said. "Trust me." Mother reached out and pulled herself up. "Keep your eyes peeled. These generals know what they're doing." Once they realize we vanished, they will look for footprints to track us down. The rain was ironically doing its job. First, it showed the soldiers our footsteps. But then, it would also wash away the footprints if it continued its torment upon the land. Mother and I were up in the tree but did not climb higher, just enough to avoid the soldiers' arrows. Then, the soldiers started shooting arrows upwards, falling upon the trees like rain. I rushed to avoid one. Mother gasped and gripped my hand in a way that made me yelp. I made myself visible so my mother would also be visible, and I stared in horror at the arrow jutting out from near her ribcage. Another one stuck out of her leg. "Pull them off," she said. "Tug quickly so it wouldn't hurt so much." Her face was red from all the running. "No." Mother stretched her leg and gripped the arrow with both hands. She bit her lips and pulled at the arrow on her leg. She let out a loud cry as the arrow was released, blood bursting forth from where the arrow had been. I bent down towards her and pressed a palm against the wound. My other hand went instinctively to her mouth to quieten her. Her determined face twisted in pain, but something more lay behind her eyes. Courage. She would not give up. She would not let herself be captured just because an arrow had struck her. I braced myself and gripped the arrow's tail in her ribcage. "I don't want to do this, Mom, but there's no other way," I said. Before she could say yes, I pulled at the arrow. As soon as it was loose, blood came gushing out from the wound. Mother clutched at the wound, face pale in an instant, and looked around. We listened for a while, wondering where the soldiers were. When we were sure that all we could hear was the tumultuous rain, I decided for the both of us. "Let's get back on the ground and go in the opposite direction." Mother nodded. On cue, I slid down the tree and waited for her. My knees were shaking in terror. When we were both on the ground, I took her hand and made both of us invisible. I felt her stiffen. She was probably as astounded by invisibility as I was when I first experienced it with Pyper. "Run now. Run faster," I urged. I pulled her hand and guided her inside the forest. This time, all I could hope for was that Nivadan would be near enough, and Nivens would help us escape. However, no one else was here in Sinista. I pulled harder at Mother's hand, hoping her wounds were not fatal enough to slow her down so much. Another lightning bolt split the sky, hitting the tree right before us. I jerked and pulled at my mother. Not even lightning could make me stop running away. My goal was to keep my mother safe, although as far as I was concerned, I was doing such a lousy job at that. With 2 arrows hitting her body, how much more of a failure could I ever possibly be? I brushed my face with the back of my other hand to see clearer. I did not see the stump that was barring the way. I lifted my leg a little too late and not high enough to avoid it, so I lost balance, my hands flailing in the air. I tried desperately to regain balance, but before I could, my foot slipped, and I fell hard against the ground. I lost contact with my mother, and she stood there under the rain, dripping with blood. At that moment, I was no longer invisible, and so was my mother. My mouth might have opened widely because my mother said, "Wounds heal, Kino." After a while, she added, "And so will mine." She said those words as though to reassure me that she was okay. Then she reached out, grabbed my hand, and pulled me up. "Shoot them, Rhodora. Shoot them!" the general shouted. His sword was in his hand and was waving it in the air. Rhodora knocked an arrow on her bow and aimed at me. My chest tightened as fear gripped me to bits. Then, I scrambled to my feet. It was only a split second. Mother glanced back and saw the knocked arrow and the determined face of the person I surmised was Rhodora. Mother leapt towards me as arrows started shooting at me. The first one that pierced my mother rang in my ears. It pierced her lower back as she jumped to protect me. "No!" I yelled. "No!" I clutched Mother towards me tightly before we slipped and fell to the ground. Rhodora's arrow shot at us, barely missing me. Mother moved above me like she was using herself as a human shield. Tears started to spring from my eyes as, one after another, arrows began raining down on us. I did not feel any pain, and I wasn't sure if that was because I was numb from it or because the arrows only struck Mother. "Mom! No!" I yelled, squirming from under her. My eyes widened in fear. "No, Mom! No!" I said raggedly. My tears mixed with the rain, and it flowed freely and generously. Without the rainwater, I was pretty sure my tears would still have rivaled a river from the way they crashed upon my heart. Mother lifted her head and clutched at my head, pinning me. Her eyes were searching mine. "All wounds heal, Kino. Remember that," she said. Her voice had gone weak and yet insistent. "Even wounds that are invisible to the eyes also heal." Then, her head bobbed downwards, and her body went limp against mine. "No, no, no!" I chanted. "No!" I shrieked. I was shivering under my mother's body, resisting what had happened. I kicked my legs to remove my mother's weight from covering me. There were footsteps. They got louder and louder until I felt calloused hands scraping against my skin as my mother was lifted from my body. I leapt and grabbed her body. "No! What are you doing? Don't touch her!" I shouted. My eyes fell upon men that were taller than anyone I ever knew. They had my mother, and they were standing in front of me. Tears continued to spring from my eyes as I hollered and thumped their bodies covered with a material that looked like barks of trees. "We're helping you, little one," a throaty voice said. My eyes widened, surprised at the proclamation. From behind them, I saw the general's soldiers knock another set of arrows on their bows. Then one by one, the arrows were released and struck the bodies of the men surrounding me. Surprisingly, the arrows hit them, but it was as though the tips of the arrows were blunt, and they fell to the ground. "We cannot fight," the throaty voice said. "Run." Then, the tall men with barks for bodies started moving away oddly. It was as though they were stiff, yet they still managed to move quickly. Suddenly, a memory found me. It was as though that was the power I copied from weeks ago, back when I was with Arden and Pyper, when we were still trying to figure out what my power was. I ran after the tall men. "Don't let them out of your sight," I heard the general's voice shout. Then, there was scampering as all of us seemed to move in one direction. Arrows started to fall like rain again, and I could not see how we would be able to escape them. "Hide in the trees," I heard a voice say. "We can hide, but not the woman," another throaty voice said. "Please, save Mother," I begged. "Please. The soldiers are not stopping their attack. We need to stop the fighting and give your mother immediate care." I glanced behind me, and the soldiers were closing in on us. They seemed to have ridden leisurely, knowing we could not go far in a short time. The general only wanted me, or maybe, he also wanted Mother. But if I were to separate from the men carrying Mother, perhaps I could make the soldiers go after me and, in that sense, save Mother. That would give Mother a chance to be cared for properly, offered treatment, and heal. I tugged at the men's hands. "Please, promise me you will save my mother." The man with a throaty voice answered, "Because you are one of us, we will care for her. And when she is well, she will bring you to us." I did not understand what he meant when he said I was one of them. But I was grateful for their promise, and instead of wasting another minute saying my goodbyes, I ran in the opposite direction. "Goodbye, Mother," I whispered, hoping the wind would carry my voice to her. "I will see you as soon as I have escaped the general. No one will ever separate us again." When I looked back, I was surprised that no one was after me. Instead, everyone was still trailing after the tall men with barks for the skin. They were rushing away from the soldiers. "I'm here!" I shouted. But no one bothered to look at me. That was when I realized that I had gone invisible on instinct. Stupid me. I cursed myself. "Come back!" I shouted after I made myself visible. The last of the horse's hoof sounds muted, and my heart sank. They will chase after Mother. Instead of saving her, I saved myself. Then, the sound of horses' hooves started pounding again, and the ground rumbled as soldiers on horses appeared one by one. I laughed heartily. Mother would be saved. I'm here. Follow me. You want me? Well, here I am. I yelled, and when I was sure they had seen me, I started running away from them. When I was far from them, and my calculations told me that the men with barks for skin had gone away, I would make myself invisible. All my life, I was only concerned about stopping the bullies from school. But this, the feeling of being chased down to save a life, was perhaps what I wanted. I never desired to be a hero. I was far from being one, yet the thought that my life could end in exchange for someone else's gave me the strength I needed at this moment. I continued pumping my fists as I ran, panting until I felt an arrow swoosh past me. And then, there's another one. And another. That was my cue. They're closing in on me, so I vanished and rolled down before I got hit. Then, I crawled fast towards the side to avoid the horses that could be trampling me any minute. I pressed my back against a tree, holding my breath as the horses rushed past me by. The soldiers were shouting as they vanished from my sight. I breathed quickly, praying they would not return and that I could go safely now. I looked around, and there was no one in sight. Maybe it was safe for me to show myself now. I turned visible, and that's when I noticed all the wounds covering my body. I also began to feel the pain now that the rush was gone. It was too late when I noticed a cloaked man approaching me. "Stop!" I shouted. But the cloaked man kept coming nearer. His strides were long. "Stay," he said in a gentle, soothing voice. I stood rooted to the spot. What was his power? It was as though he could command me. "Please. Don't come near me. I have to save my mother," I said. But the man ignored my pleas. He continued moving forward, and when he was within arm's reach, his cloak fell to the back of his head, and I gazed upon an old man with white, long hair. His eyes were as gentle as his voice had been, and I remembered him from my dream. He was the one whose words could compel men to do things. And here I was, standing right in front of him, even if what I really desired was to escape from him. The wounds on my body made their presence felt as they continued to throb. "You will be safe with me," he said. For some reason, I felt like I must believe him. Then, the exhaustion of running away from the general's soldiers caught up with me, and I collapsed. Blood was flowing from my wounds. Perhaps, now that there's someone who seemed like he meant it when he said I would be safe now in his presence, my body allowed itself to be weak. I stared at the man's face one last time, trying to place him in my memory. I recognized my mother's eyes in his eyes, and my heart leapt before I felt the world around me rotate, and unconsciousness took over me.